No more waiting for you. Are we live? We're live. All right. For those of you at home, we've been live the whole time. That's just to be clear. This is not pre-recorded. Promise. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. Good. Next week, as you heard Tim say, we're not going to be having class. We will come back on New Year's Day and have the last class in this series. So we will have one more class. So this is our next to last class on our Unsung Heroes journey, our adventure here. We're going to talk about another person today that I think is going to be interesting for us. Look forward to spending some time, spending some thought and some deliberate thinking about this particular woman that we're going to speak about today. But before we get started, let's wake ourselves up here a little bit. I want to ask you a couple questions. What do you think of? What word comes to mind to you when I say rules? Rules. Positive, negative connotations? Necessary. Okay. I hear positive and negative. I agree. Yes, I think that's right. Okay, depends on if they're stupid rules. That's true. All right. Let me then maybe shift it a little bit this way and say, are rules important? Yes. Okay, we all say rules are important. Anybody want to argue with that? Maybe if they're stupid? Oh, no? Not if they're stupid, if the rules are stupid, to be clear. So rules are important. What typically happens when we break a rule? All right, there are consequences. Consequences to rule breaking. It seems almost kind of negative in and among itself because, we don't always necessarily see that there aren't consequences for not breaking the rules, right? We understand that we need to follow rules. We understand that that's the good thing for society and for order in general, but we don't necessarily feel rewarded when we follow the rules. Who are some biblical rule breakers that you can think of? David. Moses. He was a rule maker, a rule taker, and a rule breaker. Moses did all of it, didn't he? Literally broke some rules, threw them down on the ground. So David, Moses, who else do we think of? Cain. That's a big one. That's a big rule breaker. Anyone else? Adam and Eve. Both, yes. Certainly. The original gangsters of rule breaking. Take it right back to the source. Yeah. Jesus broke the rules of man, not the rules of God, but it's an important distinction. But yeah, he was seen as a rule breaker for sure. We could argue the semantics of that, but he definitely was seen by the religious people as a rule breaker.
Notice we're not naming any women.
Well,
I was thinking of that lady who lied about where the spies went.
Rahab, sure.
Rahab. In my mind, Rahab was a rule breaker because she lied about where the spies
Okay. All right. Sometimes we bend the rules because they're stupid rules. And let's be honest, sometimes, and it's hard for us to maybe wrap our heads around this, sometimes God's plan calls for a little rule breaking. Jesus did that. Now, not the laws of God, but the laws of men. Like sometimes we've got to be cognizant of whose rules have authority, right? So that's another important aspect of it. Rules are important. Well, let me ask this, since you brought up Rahab, do we feel like there's a certain expectation when it comes to genders, to men and women, that one has to follow rules more than the other?
No. I was teasing
No.
when I said, because I was
Okay.
literally sitting here trying to come up with a woman in the Bible.
Okay.
So, no.
Well, you say no, but Portia was shaking her head, yeah. You want to elaborate on that? No. Certainly in biblical times, I'm not surprising anybody by saying this, it seemed like rules were a little bit more stringent for women than men. And certainly it was a little bit more frowned upon for a woman to break the rules. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning too. But today we're going to talk about a woman who is an integral part of a story. It's a story that we all know very, very well. But if I were to tell you the story, and I will in a moment here, the first woman that you're going to think of is not the woman we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to be in the book of Judges. We're going back to Judges. We started there with Shamgar. We're going to be back there this morning in Judges 13 and 14, which some of you are going, okay, Judges 13 and 14, we're going to talk about Samson today. And we are going to talk a little bit about Samson, but we're going to talk about one of the women in that story. When I ask you about the women in the story of Samson, who do you think of? Delilah? We're not going to talk about Delilah. We're going to talk about Samson's mother. She is a woman that, when we read this story, has a huge role, particularly in chapter 13. And we're going to read chapter 13 this morning. She has a huge role in the development in the early part of Samson's story. And we don't ever really talk about her or think about the implications of that. Today we're going to go back and look at the Judges, an unsung hero. We're going to talk about Samson's mother, a woman who had to keep all of the rules. In fact, in a lot of ways, that was her identity in the story. She was a woman who was required to keep all of the rules. Almost seems unfair, particularly when we look further on in the story of Samson and see that he's pretty fast and loose with those rules. We find this mother in the story of Judges 13 and 14, and she joins a league of women who were once barren and then delivered sons who went on to become mighty men in the Bible. Just like Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Samuel, John the Baptist. So we're going to go ahead and jump in and read this story in Judges 13. And I'm just going to go ahead and read through it. It's a little longer. You can follow along or you can listen. But we want to set the scene here for the story we're going to talk about this morning. So in Judges 13, we start with verse 1. It says, "Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Now a certain man named Zorah named Manoah, from the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was childless and unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, 'You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant. You will have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines.' Then the woman went to her husband and told him, 'A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God. Very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, "You will become pregnant and have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his death." Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God that you sent come again to teach us how to bring up this boy who is to be born." God heard Manoah, and the angel of the Lord came to the woman while she was out in the field. But her husband Manoah was not with her. So the woman hurried to tell her husband, "Here he is, the man who appeared to me the other day." Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said, "Are you the man who talked to my wife?" "I am," he said. So Manoah asked him, "When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work?" And the angel of the Lord answered, "Your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or any fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her." Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "We would like for you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you." And the angel of the Lord replied, "Even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." Manoah did not realize that it was an angel of the Lord. When Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, so that we may honor you when the word comes true?" he replied, "Why do you ask my name? It is beyond your understanding." Then Manoah took a young goat together with a grain offering and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar towards heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell on their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. "We are doomed to die," he said to his wife. "We have seen God." But his wife answered, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things that he has now told us this. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was in Manadan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So here we see the beginning story of Samson. We know a lot about his story. How often have we read that and kind of just skipped over that chapter? It includes one of the coolest exits in all of the Bible. Doesn't it? I mean, could you imagine, one, being confronted with an angel, or having that situation even arise is kind of unfathomable, and then to have that kind of an exit is, that's saying something. That'll get your attention. Let's talk a little bit about the story from the perspective of Samson's his mother. There's a tongue slip there. Let's unpack what we just read. One day, this woman is visited by an angel of the Lord, and he tells her, "You're barren and childless, but you're going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." Seems like a pretty abrupt introduction, doesn't it? What do you think about that? Any thoughts? It's an interesting introduction. Yeah. So. She definitely recognizes that it's unusual. Quite frankly, let's not kid ourselves. In this day and age, this is a man who's not your husband coming up and talking to a woman in general would have been kind of scandalous, would have been kind of an odd thing. For someone to come up and talk to you about something so intimate that they knew that you were barren and childless, that's definitely odd. It would be odd to us today, even more so in this time and in this era. But he also gives her a list of instructions that she's supposed to follow. What was different about her that caught God's attention? What do we think about when we think about Samson's mother? What was it about her that caught God's attention? Certainly, God was pretty selective in the women that he found to carry his child. We talked about that this morning with Mary. What is it that we think, from what we read here about Samson's mother, that might have stuck out to God? I know there's less of you this morning, but I know there's opinions in here. So come on. Okay. Jack said maybe she was willing to follow the rules. Maybe she had that willingness. Somebody over here? Oh, yes, Sully. Okay. Okay. Perhaps the fact that she was barren and childless would have been apparent to some people, and that may have been a great opportunity for God to show his power there. Yes?
She's respectful of her husband.
Okay. She was respectful of her husband. We'd almost, I hate to say, we'd almost expect that of a woman in this time. But yeah, she was respectful. She goes directly back and kind of shares this story, which brings up a point we're going to talk about in a minute here. But what else? Anything else that sticks out to, yes?
But she knows it's a man of God because that's the way she addresses her husband. She says, "This was a man of God."
She recognized that this was not an ordinary person. She says,
She uses the word terrified.
she terrified or awesome, yes. So depending on your version, your translation here, we see that she recognizes this is not an ordinary man, which is interesting because when he appears again later, Manoah talks to him like he's just a regular schmo. But when he appeared to her, she recognized that there was something terribly awesome about him. Yes, Jimmy.
I know it's about Zorah, no, not the wife, but she was married to Manoah.
Mm-hmm.
It says a certain man, Zorah, named Manoah.
Yeah.
And that was significant that she was married to Manoah, just like Sarah was married to Abraham.
Yeah. So maybe Manoah was a man of stature and of standing that would have been appealing for God to deliver a judge through. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Well, let's talk about this. How would we describe this woman from what we've read this morning? We said that she was respectful of her husband, certainly. What else would we say? How else would we describe her?
A godly woman.
Okay, she was a godly woman. She a rule breaker? She doesn't seem to be. God seems to think that she's going to be somebody who's going to take these rules. How easy would it be, particularly in our day and age, to slip up on this? To eat something unclean or to drink something that who knows? It's difficult enough, not like I know, but having a wife who is pregnant, it's difficult enough to go through a pregnancy. Am I right, Jack? Like, yeah. It's difficult enough. You start throwing all these rules on it. I can tell you that, with Wyatt and with Brody and Bailey both, Angie had pregnancy diabetes and had to watch what she ate. And had to count her calories and all that kind of stuff. It's a complicated thing to think about everything that you do at a time when you don't want to have to think about any of that stuff. There's a lot of hoops to jump through in a time where it's not like you could just go to a Publix and pick out any number of things. Like this was a big task and a big ask of this woman, whose name we're not even given. She is going to bring about somebody who we all know, who is going to be a judge and a victor of God's people, who's going to restore and bring them out of the reign of the Philistines. We don't even know her name. She comes across as a woman of stature. I think we think that she was relatively wise. She was certainly understanding. She knew when she was in the presence of greatness, in the presence of God. When the angel of the Lord appears to her, she receives the word and she trusts the source. How do we know that she trusts the source? She goes and tells her husband. How else? She didn't change the story at all. She's word for word, yeah. She followed his instructions. She didn't ask. She didn't question him. And we could say, oh, well, maybe she just was caught up in the moment. Or, no, she didn't. If someone came and talked to you that way, you'd have some questions. We all would. This woman recognized that there was something at play here that was larger than what she was intended to be able to fully understand. And yes, she goes right back and shares it with her husband, but she doesn't question the word of God when she hears it. Yes?
I think it has something to do with being barren.
Okay.
Probably wanting something for so long, for so many years, so passionately that when someone comes and says, hey, you're going to get what you want, you say, okay.
Okay. Well, yeah. Certainly we've seen this play out in other stories in the Bible, and there's always skepticism. Sarah laughs. Others question. She doesn't do any of that. And maybe there was some trepidation. Maybe there's some joy. Maybe there was just overcome with the awesomeness of the angel of the Lord. But she doesn't question the authenticity of what she's told. She goes back and she tells her husband, we got to get prepared. This is going to happen. So then let's jump forward a little bit here and let's talk about Manoah some. On the other hand, we see a difference in her husband Manoah's approach. How does he take this news?
Like a man.
You're going to have to flesh that out some, like a man.
Honestly, when somebody tells me something, I'm always cut half full. I'm always like, oh, okay. When somebody tells Daryl Bagley something, he's like,
Okay. So Manoah's a little bit more skeptical. Why do you think that is? I mean, you think. Okay. Well, you're a man. You would think that. No. No. I mean, look. Maybe that's fair too. The fact of the matter is, we'd like to think that certainly in our marriages we have a rapport and understanding that she's coming back. She's clearly affected by this conversation. But she tells Manoah, and what's the first thing Manoah does in verse 17 there? Manoah says, okay, great. Let's go inquire let's go and ask God again. Actually, I'm jumping ahead. In verse 8, Manoah says, okay, he takes it all in, and he prays the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. So he is taking what she's saying to heart here. I don't think he's patronizing her in saying this, but he's looking for some confirmation. And he's very careful in how he questions God in this. You know, he says, pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let this man of God that you sent come again to teach us how to bring this boy up who is to be born. Do we fault Manoah for that? Portia.
I'm a very big ideas kind of person.
Okay.
And I'll hear something or see something and think that, okay, that's great. Like, that's what we're going to do. And Daryl is just like, let me get the details. Like,
Okay.
You want to go all in. I need to get the details and see how we can, logistically get this done.
Okay.
I'm not thinking about any of that, but he thinks about all of that.
Well, and maybe more so if they're both resigned to the fact that we're not going to have a kid. And now, we're going to have a kid, and it's going to be an important one. It's going to be one who's going to deliver Israel. We can't screw this up, right? How much more so can we not screw this up? And it's not, God bless, it's not that I'm questioning my wife here, but at the same time, we need to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks here. It's important. But we see that he handles it a little bit differently. When she tells him that she is going to conceive, he prays for a second visitation as a confirmation. He also inquires the messenger's name when he shows up, which is a little interesting too. And the angel's response to him, I think, is interesting as well. The idea that, why are you asking my name? You can't even conceive of my name. Like it's beyond your understanding. Is really directing Manoah, hey, live in the here and now and focus on the good news and the task in front of you. We don't see that from his wife. She's on board. She has listened very intently the first time she was told, because she says it verbatim to her husband. She didn't let anything fall by the wayside. Even in all the excitement, she was paying attention. She was making sure that she knew what she needed to get done. So we see that it's safe for us to conclude, I think, that maybe she was a little spiritually more sensitive than her husband, and certainly more receptive to the initial interaction. Maybe so, maybe not, but she did have the benefit also of seeing the man of God the first time around. What do you think? Do you think it's fair to think that she handled it better, worse, or the same as her husband?
So I kind of disagree with you on that.
Okay.
Because my takeaway from him is that he's being very sensitive to her desire to have this baby and being told she's going to have, this child.
Yeah.
And so his love for her wants to make sure that he's confirming that she's getting the message she got. And then later he says, when this child is born, tell me, what are we supposed to do for this child? So he, again, is on board. What do I got to do to make sure my wife has this baby that she desires?
Yeah.
And I think that's love.
I think we would all agree that his skepticism is something we can relate to. And his desire to want to have that same affirmation that she has, for sure, is completely understandable. 100%, yeah. Yes, Fadia. Oh, you better get that one, Terry. You don't want to run away from that.
It kind of reminds me of the situation with Mary and Joseph.
Okay, yeah.
In the sense that the way each of them received the message. He had to hear it himself, even though Mary heard it, and then he had to hear it from an angel to really accept what God was saying.
It's different. It's different hearing it in person and hearing it secondhand. And so this is not to fault Manoah. It's just interesting to think about how their first reactions are. And our knowledge of it is very limited. But it's interesting to think about, because it's almost, it is kind of unfathomable for us to put ourselves in this woman's shoes and think about this situation and how odd it would be and how awe-inspiring to be approached by someone who looked like an angel of the Lord and was very terrifying and awesome, to give you this news and to be expected to just be able to process it right then and remember everything and do all of that. There's a lot we can learn from this woman, but I think one of the things she teaches us is that we can never outgrow our need to listen for God's call and for God's voice in our lives. If she had not been receptive to the words this man gave her, what do you think would have happened? And maybe she was chosen by God because she would be receptive. But when we think about our lives, how receptive are we in our daily lives to be maybe not approached directly by an angel, but to be open to God's call and God's word in our life? Yes?
So this is really more of an example of how we all are at different places in our relationship with God, more so than like male and female. She had been praying for a while for God to bless her with a child, and she was receptive to receive God's blessing. So
we can assume that. We're not told that she does. We are told that of other women, but yeah, we could assume that for sure.
But just her recognition of that is an angel of God, she was ready to receive God's blessing or word
100%.
to her.
Yeah, and she definitely was not expecting this message. We see that. She is not expecting this message at all. Unlike some others in the Bible, we're not told that she was prayerful or asking or looking or even, having, I'm sure she had a desire for it, but we're not told that she was, down crying at the church or begging, lamenting God for this. She may very well have been, but we don't know that aspect of it. But she's just told that she was once unable to have a child, but God was going to make her able to bear children, and that her pregnancy was going to be different from most others. And then we don't see her ask the angel anything at all beyond that. We don't see her question it. We don't see her push back. And it could be that she was taken in the moment, but she certainly paid attention. In fact, when she shares the story with her husband, she admits that she didn't really even ask any follow-up questions. She just was on board. She just was quick to share that story. Yes?
I think God knows us more intimately than anyone else, and he knows exactly like how I will take and handle information and how Daesh would take and handle information. And I think this is just one of the ways that he is showing, because like when he gave the message to Sarah and she laughed, and I think that was probably just a defense mechanism because she, for so long had, not been able to. But
Sure.
I think he knew this woman's heart and her and like what she would do when she was confronted with that information. And it's just his way of showing us how he can work in different situations.
I think you're absolutely right. I think also it's interesting that she doesn't ask those questions, but she goes back and talks to her husband immediately because this is going to impact him too. He's going to be a father. That's great news. He's going to be a father of a child that's very important, and there are some strings attached to this. We've got to do this the right way. And we could dive into the different thoughts about, Manoah asking for some clarification and all that kind of stuff. But the ironic part, and the part that I'm surprised perhaps more of the sisters didn't pick up on this here, is that when Manoah begs God for a reappearance in the Bible, what does God do? That's right. He hears Manoah, and he sends the angel of God back to who? To the woman. And then she says, well, wait, look, we've gone through this before. Let's go get my husband because you're a better messenger for him than I am, right? And she recognized that about her husband. But the fact of the matter is, I think God is making the point of saying, you're the one that's going to be responsible to carry this child and to make sure that you keep the rules. You're the one that's going to have to abstain from these things. You're the one who is going to fall, the duty is going to fall on to be the house, to be the incubator for this judge. And yeah, your husband's going to have a part in it, and he does speak to him, and we see how that interaction goes, and it's great. But she was the woman chosen by God to bring about the judge of Israel. She would not only have to bear the burden of pregnancy, but a pregnancy stricken with rules. And ultimately, she had to carry the burden of being a prophecy bearer. She was the one who was going to bear that prophecy. Manoah is going to be there to help her through it, and to provide, and to be the father, and to take on a huge role in that, not to downplay it, but it was really going to fall on her to make sure that she kept the rules. And how important was it for her to keep those rules? More important than it was for Samson after he was born, apparently. When the angel of God appeared to her, no one apart from her knew what her son's calling and purpose was, in verse 4. She goes and immediately shares it with her husband, and when her husband Manoah asks how to bring the boy up, the rule to his life and what his mission would be, what does the angel say to Manoah? He says, what do we have to do? What does he say back to her? In verse 12. No one wants to read it out loud? So Manoah asked him, when your words are fulfilled, what is the rule that governs this boy's life and work? And the angel of the Lord answered, you want to know the rules? Here's the rules. Your wife has to follow the rules we've given her. Thanks for playing, Manoah. Hold her hand, get her through this pregnancy, but the rules are your wife has to follow the words of God. It's a little bit different, isn't it? We're told that she's that important in the story, but we're not told her name. Yes, in the back.
You may not want to add this in personally, but I will, but she was made the example.
Okay.
For her husband. She showed a lot of accountability. She had to be accountable for what she ate, what she put into her body, and she was very obedient. And it's an example for women today, too. When we're leading our children and when we're leading our husbands, we have to be that example. So like the brother over there said, it was very purposeful that the Lord worked through her to get to her husband and now through her child that's being born.
Yeah. When we talk about the story of Samson, we always talk about the fact that he was set apart from birth. Very seldomly do we talk about the fact that he was set apart from conception. It's a big deal. There's a big difference. It's a huge part of the story. He was to be the deliverer, but first she had to deliver. Literally. Yes.
I think he has a big part in this too.
He does. Yeah.
It says, be sure your wife follows the instructions I gave her.
Yeah.
Which we can read that as negative, like, ooh, she has instructions and he doesn't. Or we can read it as a positive. You can help her by not tempting her.
Well,
Don't
yeah.
bring the grapes nearby. Don't, don't be eating grapes in the tent and say, oh, look, they're juicy today, So his part was in that love aspect to help her.
I think you're absolutely right. Believe me, standing here as a father and a husband, I agree. Yes, 100%. He was there to help, and I'm not bashing on Manoah this morning, but I am saying far too often we read through these stories and skip over the importance of the roles that are going on behind the scenes. Yes.
It's not our fault. It's not our fault that we're skipping over it because God is like, Manoah, Manoah, Manoah. I mean, it's in the Word. It's not our fault that we're skipping over this lady because especially, a lot of times it is the man who's spoken to by God.
Well, and that's going to bring us back to the overarching theme of all of this, because the fact of the matter is, for us individually, men, women, brothers, sisters, children of Christ, children of God, we are playing out roles in our own stories, in each other's stories. And we are very often unsung heroes, but that doesn't limit our ability to allow God to use us and to allow us to be used through everything that we have to bring and offer. Some things we don't have to bring and offer, just a willingness to say, God, you're in control, send me where you need me to go, and let me be there. Let me trust in the fact that you've given me and equipped me with what I need to do what you need to be done in that moment. So going back to the big whole overarching theme of everything that we're talking about. But in this particular story, this unsung woman is such a beautiful example for mothers, fathers, parents, for all of God's people. As a parent, when we see children throwing tantrums, our children throwing tantrums and acting stubborn, it's quick for us to get disappointed. There are times when I talk to my kids and I tell them they're supposed to behave like they're set apart. They need to remember that, like I've been told so many times growing up, remember whose you are and what you are, whose you are. Samson's mother reminds us our children are born in this world without having heard God's prophecy. And it's easy for us to forget that sometimes, particularly when they get to those difficult teenage years. Our children are brought in this world without the benefit of knowing God's prophecy. Whose job is it to pass that legacy on? It's 100% ours. We've got vacancies in the back, so I'm asking again, whose job is it for us to do that? Because I don't know that we take it as seriously as we should. In fact, I know speaking personally, we don't take it as seriously as we should. There is a generation that is coming and a generation behind that are dependent on us sharing the prophecy and the gospel and the goodwill of God. Amen. Yeah.
You know, that reminds me, even when we volunteer to teach in the church, we can tell which kids are being instructed the Word of God at home by the way they respond to our teaching. And it's encouraging to see that.
It is encouraging, 100%. And it's more than, you know what, they learn the books of the Bible song. They need to know how to find the books in the Bible. It's more than learning 50 scriptures to go to Atlanta for Lads and Leaders or whatever it is the kids do these days. I don't know. It's knowing how to put it in place. It's knowing that when they find that situation where they're being pressured or where they're being given an opportunity to do something dumb, which we all were, and they certainly are, when we see that they are being confronted with an opportunity and living in a world where sin is not just rampantly available, it is aggressively seeking them out. They need to know and be brought up in such a way that we share that prophecy, that good word, that we keep the rules for ourselves as examples and enforce those rules. And we could go and talk another hour this morning about how maybe they dropped the ball in the second part of that, looking at the life of Samson. But they did something right at the beginning because he ended up in the right place.
Wait, did you say the parents dropped the ball when Samson made that decision?
I said, no. What I said we could debate the fact that Samson definitely had some errors and some things. We all are going to, 100%. Like we have to live and take an active role to raise. Believe I've got teenagers too. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is raise up a child the right way, and when he grows older, he'll not stray from it. And that's not me saying it, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of that goes to raising up the right way. For this woman, it meant starting at conception. And for us, maybe we don't have to change our diet, but you know what? That mindset starts before conception. That mindset starts when you create a family, when you seek out to create a family, because that is the foundation that you have to grow from. Marcia, did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's interesting. Obviously, Manoah and his wife had a deep relationship with the Lord before this happened. Mm-hmm. She recognized he was an angel, and then Manoah says, well, now we're surely going to die. We've seen God. Yeah. And that relationship. I know I feel looking back on teaching so much, I didn't focus enough on the relationship that we all need to have with the Lord. And, it's his story. Like you said, the big overarching thing is his story, and we're just able to play a little part in that, and they played a little part in it. The fact that we don't know her name, she doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's
100%. But The idea being that she is an unsung hero. And she's one that we could read this story and very quickly move beyond the sacrifices that she made to put Samson in the position that he needed to be in to do something great for God. And even if you say, oh, okay, so what? She couldn't drink any wine. She couldn't eat anything unclean. She shouldn't have been doing that anyway. You know, she couldn't do any. Oh, okay. The fact of the matter is, she allowed God to use her, and agreed to adhere to these rules in a time where she probably wasn't going out of her way to pay attention to a bunch of rules. She allowed to submit to this so that she could be in a situation for God to use her for something greater than she could have ever imagined. It'd have been a whole nother story if she'd have been the one who, picked up the jawbone of a donkey and slaughtered a bunch of. We definitely know her name then. We'd be talking about her a lot. But that wasn't the role. It was the unsung, behind-the-scenes role. And so many times in our lives, that's the role that we're called to play. Yes?
So many times, as parents, we think about, or maybe we don't think about, okay, this cute baby or this cute toddler is one day going to be an adult.
Yeah.
A lot of parents get stuck in the cuteness of it and not what they're actually putting into that child, right? What is this child going to be? This is my son right here, and I projected my life through that, what I'm saying right now. He's not going to be the cute kid forever. So what are you going to put into him so he can be maybe a great unsung hero, or a great citizen, or a great Christian, a great father, a great husband? You got to put those things into your children, and with society being so tainted nowadays, it's even harder, like you just said. But we got to think about, okay, Lord, the greatest thing I can give my child is Jesus and the Bible, teaching him that. It's not what the social media or all those things that will taint him and take him away from the Word of God. But what are you putting into that child so they move away from that cuteness and now they are productive, they're a Christian, right? So you got to think about that as a Christian parent. That's most important too.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think when we think about this woman and Manoah both, we have to take we learn from them. We have to take an active role to raise, provide teaching and examples to intercede for, and to pray, certainly, for our children. And they're all our children. Whether you brought them into this world, or whether you got spanking privileges, or whether you got to grab them in the hallway and straighten them out, they're all our children. We have a responsibility to do that. It's Tom.
You said it. They're our responsibility. They're God's children too, and He's expecting us to do something. I've always thought it was interesting when adults tell their children how to raise their grandchildren. Instead of telling your children how to raise your grandchildren, show them how to raise your grandchildren as they're growing up with you.
Agreed. Hey, Gary, get that mic away from him, because I don't want to hear him amen this too loud. We do that knowing full well, because just like us, they're going to make mistakes. Kids are going to do dumb things. Surprise. We did too. Goodness knows Samson did. Very, very famously, Samson did. But if we don't follow the rules from an early age and teach them to follow God's rules in their life, we run the risk of our children growing up not knowing the value that their Creator places on them. Not allowing them to know that they are destined for so much more if they'll just allow God to work through them. Manoah and his wife kept the rules. And certainly his wife, stressed in Scripture, had to keep those rules. And you see, certainly as he grew older, he strayed from some of those things, but while he lived at home, he didn't get his hair cut. Probably the exact opposite of most people, cut your hair. No, with him, he didn't get his hair cut. They kept him on the straight and narrow as long as they could. When he desired a woman from another culture, his parents were going, you don't want to do that. And when he insisted, they were saying, you really don't want to do this. They were doing everything they could to help enforce those rules throughout his life. And he made some mistakes. And he paid dearly for those mistakes. But ultimately, he was brought up in such a way that he knew how to find his way back home. And we talk a lot about the end of that story because it ended in the way that it probably should have begun. He submitted to God, he humbled himself, and he was able to do something incredible. But that story didn't start with the jawbone of a donkey, and it didn't start with ripping a gate off of a wall. It started with a scared woman being told, you're going to have a child, and you're going to have to raise him by the rules. And so we learn from this woman how important it is not only to live by God's example, but to instill that in our children. It's vitally important. And as we run out of time this morning, I just want to leave you with these couple thoughts. When you allow yourself and make a habit of actively listening to God and for God, I think we learn in this story that he'll reveal himself to you. And sometimes when you're not expecting it, he'll reveal himself to you. Tom? Oh, okay. And then the last thought that we'll end this on is that your prayers and your willingness to teach them how to live godly lives is the best gift that you can give to your children and to your neighbor's children and to the future of the Lord's church. And it's something we need to take seriously, probably more serious than we do. And so that is my closing thought for today. We are out of time, so we will not be back next week. We'll be here at church. We won't have class. And then on New Year's Day, we will wrap up this whole series and start the year off with a bang, I hope. So thanks for your time this morning, and we'll see you next time.